You're listening to this file from youtube.com/mahdi abedi. MAHDIABEDI. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like and share the video, and post your comment below. Also, my website is mahdiabedi.com, which there you can find my projects and contact info.
The Evil Chocolate Guide to Podcasting. By The Evil Chocolate Cookie, copyright 2022 by The Evil Chocolate Cookie. This book is property of The Evil Chocolate Cookie. It may not be copied, in whole or in part, without the express permission of the author. Chapter 3. Let's get started, and now, the moment you've been waiting for. It's time to actually start your podcast. This comes with its own challenges and decisions, but they are a little easier to make. You'll choose a hosting service, set up your podcast, and decide how to distribute your podcast to other platforms. Let's jump in and get started. And now, the host of your podcast. The hardest thing you have to do now is choose a host for your podcast. A podcast host is not like a game show host. A podcast host is simply the service that holds onto your podcast on the internet. There are several of these. Some are more advanced than others. For the first time in this book, I'm going to make a suggestion. Anchor is probably the best host for a beginner. They do most of the work for you. All you have to do is record your episodes. If you feel comfortable working with more advanced features, you can choose another provider. However, Anchor may be the best thing for an absolute beginner. They handle distribution, monetization, and other aspects of the podcast for you. We will discuss distribution later in this chapter. We will discuss monetization in Chapter 6. Other hosts include Podbean, SoundCloud, and Libsyn. I can't say much about them because, well, I don't use them. Let's get you all set up. Now that you've chosen a host, let's set up your podcast. First, you need to create an account with your host. When that's done, select the option to start a podcast. You'll be asked for some information about your podcast. Enter the title you chose in Chapter 2 and a description for your podcast. You'll also be asked to select a category for your podcast. Your host may ask if your podcast contains adult content. It's very important to make sure this option is set correctly. We wouldn't want half your listeners locked out because you accidentally set your clean podcast as containing adult content, now would we? On the flip side, we wouldn't want a 5-year-old to get in trouble for listening to a podcast that contains adult content and wasn't marked as explicit. After providing all of the requested information, you should be ready to record and upload your first episode. First episode time. With all the planning and setup out of the way, it's finally time to record that first episode. I can't tell you exactly what to do with your first episode. One option is to introduce yourself and your podcast to your listeners. Tell the audience a little bit about you and why you started your podcast. Also tell them what your podcast will focus on. Use this first episode to lay the groundwork for future episodes. You could also just jump into your topic, but this could leave your listeners with more questions than answers. Now let's talk about length. Recording a 2-hour episode in the very beginning might not be a great idea. The first episode should probably be shorter than what you plan to release normally. Remember, your listeners may not have heard of your show before. This episode is meant to intrigue them and get them interested in what you're doing. If they get bored, they may not come back. I'm not trying to scare you. I just want to help you get off on the right foot with your listeners. Get it out there. The next thing to think about is distributing your podcast to listening platforms. People can't listen if they can't find your show. Basically, there are 2 ways of doing this. You can manually distribute your podcast using its RSS feed link. Some hosting providers will also take care of distribution for you, in case the RSS method seems too advanced. Some creators prefer to use both methods at the same time. Let's discuss each of them in more detail. Manual distribution, the DI option. Manual distribution may be best for those who are more comfortable working with advanced functions of podcasting. It also may work well for those who are afraid of their podcast host trying to control every aspect of their show. Manual distribution works like this. When you create your podcast, you're given the link to your podcast's RSS feed. I don't have the slightest idea what RSS stands for, but I do know what it does. That link is the universal way to find your podcast. Once you have the link, it's your job to send it along to listening platforms like Spotify, Apple, and Google, among others. It sounds like a lot of work, and sometimes it can be. Each platform has its own rules regarding podcast submissions, and they can be hard to remember. Some platforms make it simple. Others make it difficult for the smartest, most tech-savvy person to manage. Don't blame yourself if a platform is giving you trouble. It isn't your fault. Maybe you can come back to that one later. Automatic distribution, the easy way. Manual distribution isn't for everyone. For those who aren't comfortable with this option, some hosting providers offer automatic distribution. That means they do all the work. So what do you have to do here? Absolutely nothing most of the time. The important thing to remember is not all hosts offer this option. If this looks attractive to you, make sure your host offers it. The hybrid approach, the best of both worlds. Okay, so maybe you want your hosting provider to handle distribution for you, but they only support a few platforms. Maybe you want your podcast on places like Amazon. This is where manual distribution comes in again. You can use automatic distribution for the platforms your host supports and manual distribution for others you want to reach. Yes, it can be a pain, but it can be worth it. You want to extend your reach as much as possible, so try to get to as many platforms as you can.
Thanks for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like and share the video, and post your comment below. Also, my website is mahdi.com, which there you can find my projects and contact info.